Have you ever just stopped and wondered how human languages can be so incredibly different from each other? I mean, wildly different. And yet, any child, anywhere on Earth, can pick up any one of them perfectly. It's one of the biggest puzzles about the human mind, and today we're going to try to unravel it. Just take a look at this. In English, we say the woman chopped wood. Subject, verb, object. Simple, right? Well, in Japanese, that verb gets kicked all the way to the end. And in Irish, the verb comes right at the beginning. These aren't just little quirks, They are fundamentally different blueprints for building a thought. So the real question is, how on earth is a single human brain pre-wired to handle all of these options? So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start with the puzzle itself, then we'll look at the first really elegant solution that linguists came up with. After that, we'll see how a major plot twist complicated everything, and finally, we'll explore where the science is at today. All right, so let's dive into the core problem. If all of us humans share a single biological blueprint for language, how do we end up with thousands of different languages that look and sound so unique? For decades, the leading idea has been Noam Chomsky's theory of universal grammar. You can think of it like this. We're all born with a shared operating system for language hardwired into our brains. It's not English or Japanese, but the basic architecture that lets us learn any language. But, okay, if the OS is universal, where does all the variety come from? Well, this brings us to the first big breakthrough, a really beautiful theory that tried to solve this exact puzzle. How do you get variation out of a universal system? It's called the Principles and Parameters Theory, or PNP, and the idea is just brilliant. It says that universal grammar has two parts. You have principles, that's the fixed wiring, the stuff that's the same in every single language on the planet, and then you have parameters, and these are like a big series of switches that can be flipped either on or off, creating all that amazing diversity we see. This quote really nails why the theory was so powerful. Suddenly, learning a language wasn't this impossible task of figuring out thousands of rules from scratch. No, a child's brain is just doing one simple thing. It's setting the switches based on the language it hears. And here's how it works. A baby is born with this whole switchboard of possibilities. Then they listen to the language around them, and based on that data, their brain just starts flipping switches. Does the verb come before the object? Click. Can you drop the subject of a sentence? Click. Once all those switches are set, boom, you have the basic grammar of your native language. It was just an incredibly clean and powerful explanation. But, and there's always a but in science, isn't there? Just as the switchboard model was really taking hold, a new way of thinking came along and pretty much flipped the whole table over. This was the big plot twist in our story. The new question that started to drive research in the 90s was this. What if we've been overthinking it? What if the innate blueprint for language is actually radically, almost absurdly simple? And this was the beginning of what's called the Minimalist Program. The whole goal was to strip universal grammar down to its absolute bare bones. The thinking was, maybe all we're born with is one super simple, super powerful operation, an operation called merge, which literally just takes two things and puts them together. And maybe everything else about language just grows out of that. So here's the problem. This quest for ultimate simplicity completely broke the switchboard model. Why? Because if universal grammar is this tiny, simple thing, it just doesn't have room for a big, complicated switchboard full of preset options. Those switches themselves were a form of built-in complexity. And just like that, the elegant solution for language variation was gone. This sent linguists right back to the drawing board. If the variation isn't in a big, built-in switchboard, then where in the world could it be? They had to find a new home for it. And this is the brilliant new idea that came out of it. What if the variation isn't in the universal operating system at all? What if instead it's coded into the properties of the words themselves, specifically the little grammar words in a language? This collection of words is called the functional lexicon. We're not talking about words with rich meanings like cat or run. We're talking about the nuts and bolts, the structural skeleton of our sentences, things that mark tense or negation or make a sentence a question. The new theory was that this is where the switches were hitting all along. Okay, so check out how this works. Instead of a few big switches, the idea is that you have thousands of tiny micro-parameters attached to these little grammar words. So, for example, the tiny element for tense in French might have an instruction that says, attract the verb, and the answer is yes. That's why the verb moves around. In English, that same tiny switch is set to no. Or take the thing that introduces a question, the complementizer. It might have a little feature that says, attract a question word, yes or no. Even something like the can have a tiny instruction about whether you have to say it out loud. Each one is a tiny switch, and together they create this huge cascade of differences. The linguist Luigi Rizzi came up with this amazing analogy. He said it's like DNA. A single tiny action, one little binary feature on one little grammar word can have massive cascading effects throughout the entire language. It's like how one gene can affect a whole bunch of different traits. All these thousands of tiny instructions interact, and what you get is the vast, complex, beautiful differences between all the world's languages. But this new idea isn't the final word, of course. Like any healthy science, this is still a really active and fascinating debate with a few competing ideas about how to solve this mystery for good. So, speaking very broadly, the debate has kind of split into two main camps. On one side, you have the view we've been talking about, that variation is real, it's syntactic, and it's driven by all these tiny switches in our grammar words. But there's another camp that's starting to argue that maybe the whole idea of parameters or switches is the wrong way to look at it. This other view basically says that parameter is just a useful label for linguists to describe differences, but it's not a real thing in our brains. They argue that if our core grammar is truly minimal, then variation is just, well, inevitable. It's what happens when you have to take an abstract thought and turn it into actual sound. The differences aren't caused by preset switches, they just emerge naturally. And that leaves us with this incredible question. Is the blueprint for language in our minds more like an old school switchboard with a few big chunky levers that set the course for an entire language? Or is it more like a strand of DNA, a vast, complex system of tiny, local instructions whose interactions give rise to all the magnificent diversity of human language? The search for that answer is what makes this field so exciting.